Okay, all set?
Perfect.
Nice try.
I tried.
Okay.
I'm no good at phone markets.
Okay, thank you all so much for joining us for this event. Hello. We at Left Wing Books are so honored and excited to bring you Jaye P. Willis, who will be discussing her new book, The Pandemic Prophet, the Soulistic View of the Socioeconomic Guinea Worms of Modern Minds, telling the story of Mr. Reginald E. Petty. So some housekeeping before we dive in. For all of you here in person, we thank you so much for being here, and we thank you for wearing your mask for the duration of the event as well. And for those of you joining us online, welcome to you as well. We are excited to be continuing to offer hybrid events so we can reach wider audiences, and we really appreciate your support. You'll be able to participate in the event tonight with the rest of our live audience. For the Q&A session, just type your question as comments on your streaming platform. So tonight's event is only possible because of all of your support. When you support Left Wing Books and other local businesses, your money goes directly into your local economy. So it helps keep our bookstore open, but it also helps keep the streets paved, the libraries funded, parks free, and so many other things that make St. Louis a great place. So thank you all so much for shopping local and supporting this event. We encourage you to check out our full events calendar on our website, left-banks.com. Of note, we're excited. They want to swap, okay. Of note, we are excited for our upcoming event on December 3rd, collaboration with the Humans of St. Louis, whose new photography and story collection tells the story of all the wonderful, amazing residents of the St. Louis area, so we look forward to that. So for tonight's event, Jaye Willis's new book, The Pandemic Prophet, again tells the life story of Mr. Reginald E. Petty, who we are honored to have joining us this evening as well. Mr. Petty is from a small town in southern Illinois called East St. Louis. Now considered an economically deprived city, Mr. Petty has always been driven by a passion to improve both his home as well as himself. The Pandemic Prophet speaks to his upbringing and what makes him a legend to not only the citizens of his hometown, but throughout the world, particularly in Africa. Mr. Petty was one of the first African-American Peace Corps country directors, appointed by the U.S. President John F. Kennedy. He served in several African nations and went on to receive presidential appointments from 3 additional U.S. presidents. He was instrumental in the voter registration efforts of the American South in the late 1950s and early 1960s, and was a friend and confidant to major civil rights icons such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Congressman John Lewis, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and Malcolm X, just to name a few. Jaye P. Willis has woven together poetry and prose to explore Mr. Petty's life, his family, those whom he has helped, his achievements, and his messages to the youth. Using information she collected from interviewing Mr. Petty himself, as well as his peers and proteges, and pulling from archival records, photos, and stories from Black history, Jaye Willis now shares his inspirational story with us all. So please join me in welcoming our guests for this evening, Jaye P. Willis and Mr. Petty.
We're going to start off, and thank you so much for coming. I see so many familiar faces, and I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that people could join us online as well. We're going to start off with Mr. Petty reading the introduction that he wrote in the book from 2007. Mr. Petty?
I'm writing an introduction without being sure what I'm writing an introduction to. Over the years, friends and family have suggested that the experiences in my life are sufficiently unique and interesting enough to be of value to succeeding generations. A draft was begun in 1983. This document began as an attempt to describe some of my life-shaping experiences as a Black man living and working in Africa, in America and Africa. Philosophical changes along the way would be included to relate experimental impact on my psyche and resulting behavior. It was decided early on that in order to understand the referred to experiences, it would be necessary to have some knowledge of my historical base. This includes the relevant history of my family, community, and the nation. The concept of elders passing information on to the youth in both formal and informal ways exists in all cultures. And in thousands of years old, in certain American ethnic and religious groups, processes exist for passing on information crucial to their continued existence. In fact, years were spent trying to determine what information would be most valuable. A listing of what can be described as life-shaking incidents and memories will serve as the underpinning. Hence, I spend considerable time reflecting on my past and bringing forth feelings to elicit my story.
The Pandemic Prophet, a Soulistic View of the Socioeconomic Guinea Worms of Modern Minds, the Legacy of Reginald E. Petty. It is one heck of a title, isn't it? I am about to explain what that title means, and interestingly enough, that's one of the first parts of the book. When I tried to share this with other people, they were like, what in the world? So here's the explanation. As this book is being published in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, aka COVID-19, the irony of the title chosen for this biography over 5 years ago is not lost on me. The current state of the world, especially the United States of America, can still benefit from the trials and tribulations of this amazing man, Reginald E. Petty, whose life experiences predicted and epitomized our current state. The title may be long, but has significant meaning that I want to share with the reader. Mr. Petty found the title both inventive and acceptable. Members of my family and friends found it too long and in need of major explaining before they would even venture to read the book. When I mentioned this to Mr. Petty, he reminded me that I'm the author. I am empowered and I do not need anyone else's acceptance of my vision. I love this dude so much. The pandemic is not of the body, but the mind. The word soulistic is a neologism used to express the deep core of our being that drives us to be human. Guinea worms are parasites that live in unpurified drinking water. They enter the body when unclean drinking water is ingested. They thrive on the fluids in the host body until growing to size or maturing and then exiting the body through the skin. It is my contention that beliefs like racism, bigotry, intolerance, and all manner of evil against our fellow man are guinea worms that enter our bodies via unfiltered thoughts. The worms then manifest themselves or leave our minds via opinions that lead to unjust legislation or policies or misconceptions that adversely affect a core group of people. Reg points to many of these modern mind guinea worms through his interactions with people all over the world. It is an honor to place these thoughts into written form to share with all people and hopefully make this world a better place. Now, the way that this book is set up is a little bit unique because, I'm a little bit different. I wrote it in scores, and many of us that, this kind of showing our age, had to memorize the Gettysburg Address back in the day. When I first heard scores, and he said 407 years ago, and that word score just stuck in my head, and it did something for me. So scores are basically 20-year periods. And I wrote Mr. Petty's life story in 20-year periods. And I did that for a reason, and one of those is because within all of our lives, it's always cool to just take a look at where you were at a certain period. And some of the most amazing things that happened in his life happened in those first 3 scores. And as I just turned 59 this year and will be 60 next year, I will be going into my 3rd score. And I'm really excited about it, because there were so many things that I wanted to accomplish. And when I take my life and look at it in bite-sized pieces, you can really see how you've done that. These books begin, each score begins and ends with original poetry as well. A piece from myself, and it ends with one from Mr. Petty. So, let us begin with one score. Conceived through segregation, birth through 1935 to 1955. Haiku in blue. A righteous spirit, conceived through segregation, blossoms in darkness. In the beginning, even the most seemingly simple question to Reg turns into an indictment of the times. Where were you born? His response was poetic in nature. I was conceived in East St. Louis, Illinois, but I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. To understand why this statement is so powerful, I will need to give you some background on the region at the time. Reginald E. Petty was born on October 7th, 1935. His parents, Bruce Petty and Helen Nicholson Petty, resided in East St. Louis, but the hospitals in the city, St. Mary's and Christian Welfare, were segregated and would not allow Negro children to be born there. There were few options left for them, including midwifery or home delivery by a Negro doctor. The last option was to have their children in hospitals in St. Louis, Missouri, that allowed Negro births. Reg was born in the Negro section of Barnes Hospital in St. Louis. It is important to note that the Mississippi River is the only mass that separates the two cities. It is less than 15 minutes to travel across the bridge from the east side to Barnes Hospital, but it is a trip marred by the bigotry and betrayal of the civil rights originally afforded to the Black man when slavery was abolished. How more ironic that Missouri, the state where Dred Scott fought for his freedom from slavery, a state widely known for its heritage of slavery, became the last bastion for birthing Black children in the region. Reginald is the eldest of two sons. His younger brother, Bruce Anthony Petty Jr., bears the name of his father. I asked Reg if this was a practice of the times. His recollection centered on a conversation with his mother of his father not believing that the child she was carrying was his. His father would not give Reg his first name. That was all that he could remember of the circumstances. Of the things that he could remember, though, I received a royal history lesson in East St. Louis, as well as a deeper view into the soul of this man. I want to share with you something that really bothered me about my not knowing about Reginald Petty. I too was born in St. Louis in Barnes Hospital, but I was reared in East St. Louis. I went through grade school and high school. I went off to college at SIU Carbondale. I graduated. I came back. I started working. And in all of those years, I had never heard of Reginald Petty. And it was amazing to me. And I start the book off with that, and I didn't read that. But when you look at all the things that are around us, and I point to the arch, I was 22 years old before I went into the arch, having lived here my whole life. And the analogy that I make is that how interesting it is and how strange that when things are right there with you, you take them for granted. You don't do it. You don't think about it. You know, people from all over the world have been in the arch. And I was 22 before I ever went in. And when I think about that, I think about not knowing Mr. Petty. I never knew him, never even heard of him. But when I did find out about him, I had to wonder, how in the world did all of this happen? That I never knew about this man the whole time I was going through school. And that's one of the reasons that this book was written. So, Reg readily recalls growing up in a small home in the Pollock Town neighborhood, a segregated section of East St. Louis where many Polish immigrants lived. Now, I contend that the word Pollock is a derogatory term, and I don't mean to use it in that manner, but as a common point of reference in the city at the time. In Pollock Town, white people lived on certain blocks and Black people lived on the others. He remembered at the ages of 3 to 5 living in 4 rooms with his parents, grandparents, Carl and Georgia Smith, Aunt Lillian Smith, cousin Frederick Boyd, and brother. His bed was a cold room where 2 or 3 of them slept each night. There was a potbelly stove in the room next to his, in which his grandparents slept. The adults sat around the stove and talked about the day's events as well as the days of old, and the children listened. They had an outdoor toilet and a water spout. He maintains vivid memories of the cold man and the ice man coming down the street announcing their arrival. Coal was shoveled down the home chute and blocks of ice were chopped up for the ice box, now known as a refrigerator. Even the Saturday night baths and the number 10 round tin tub were not forgotten. His father was a dark-skinned man, while his mother was exceptionally light-skinned. Reg remembers the smell of chickens and ducks in the backyard. He also enjoyed sitting on the front porch and listening to the adults talk and gossip. One topic that left an indelible mark on Reg was a discussion of the 1917 riots in East St. Louis. The number of colored people lynched, burned alive, and otherwise killed that were reported in the newspapers was woefully low and underreported based on his elders' accounts. This event would factor in a major way later in his life. And now I'm going to skip to the end of one score, and this is the original poem by Reginald Petty, and it's entitled Out of Character. Who we are, lying down across graves of our ancestors, absorbing their chi, still learning from them even after their deaths. Dancing flowers, pressing forward. What is there for us to give but what we are given? What is there to teach but what we are taught? The only love that blossoms forth from us is generations old. We find a place for ourselves in ourselves, our totality, our ancestors, judged by all who passed before. Limitless knowledge, limitless love, if we but ask, if the drums ask for us, if the arts ask for us, if the unspoken words ask for us, if our friends ask for us, if our family asks for us, if our community asks for us. Our past selves always ask for us. Can we listen? I wanted to move on to a little bit more about Reg. You heard from the introduction that he was big in civil rights, and he did this at an early age. And I think that that's critically important that we kind of cover a little bit of that. Mr. Petty, is there anything you want to say before we move into that? Okay. Reg was a research assistant on a project in the sociology department. He was tasked to collect all computer data using modern techniques at the time. Any SIU Carbondale graduates in the room? Raise your hand. Oh, salukis, salute. He made himself available to all the departments, with Dr. Brooks being his main professor. During this time, he visited Mississippi and Alabama to analyze voter registration issues in the South. Based on his findings, he joined several groups involved in improving the process for Black voting, including the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Over the next few years, he maintained a second home outside of Jackson, Mississippi. Okay. Recalling, one day I was sitting outside of a lady's home drinking a Coca-Cola and talking with her about registering to vote. I sat the bottle down next to me. White police officers arrested me for littering and took me to a white barbershop where they shaved my head. During this degrading act, their discussion was on how ignorant and unstable Blacks are by coming to Mississippi and Alabama to register Blacks to vote. I had to keep from laughing, as I almost had my master's degree, while the white folks talking barely had a 6th grade education. During his time in Mississippi registering Blacks to vote, Reg was arrested over 30 times. At the time, he believed that was a record number of arrests for an individual for voter registration. He also fell victim to some of the most heinous brutalization inflicted on a man at the hand of those sworn to protect and serve. This would not be the first or the last time that his life was placed on the line in support of others. I often wondered if Reg had a death wish, because of the situations he continued to place himself in for others. I now see that he, like all great people who strive to make substantive changes in the human condition, are selfless in following their hearts and minds to achieving their life's purpose. Reg became a lifelong friend with a young man who also worked with voter registration efforts, including being one of the original Freedom Riders and a leader in SNCC. His name was John Lewis. He will become a U.S. Congressman from the state of Georgia and served for over 30 years. Reg also met with friends and confidant Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Stokely Carmichael, who succeeded John Lewis as the leader of SNCC because he was having doubts in the programs being established would be successful based on the economics of the communities. Blacks could vote in some situations, but unemployment was still difficult and unequal. He would participate in many meetings of the mind of high-ranking officials in the civil rights movement as his personality and drive matched theirs. And I'm going to lead you now to your handouts. The first handout is just a copy of the front of the book. But if you look at that second handout, a few years ago while I was still working, I am employed now, hallelujah. Oh, I'm retired, hallelujah, I'm retired. July 2019. In 2017, my dad was about to turn 80. And this is a picture of my dad here. He passed on in April, but he is always with me. And he is here with me with this book. I wasn't able to put it in his hands, but he's always here with me. And my daughter was just finishing her second master's degree from SIU, Edwardsville, in marketing. Was it marketing management or something? Marketing research. Can't keep up with her. And anyway, I had to go to Washington, D.C. for some training. So she was on spring break. I took her with me. And, you know, one of the cool things about working for the government is whenever you stay in a hotel, you get government rate. So you never pay what everybody else is paying. And I had an opportunity to stay at the Ritz-Carlton in Pentagon City. And so, and I can say that now because management did not like us staying in the fancy hotels, but one of my coworkers is sitting here. And so Lauren and I were in a room, and my dad was coming, and I said, well, we could just, you know, bring a cot in there and dad could stay with us. And, you know, the little guy behind the desk, I think he was kind of smitten with my daughter. He said, no, go get your grandfather his own room, and you can use government rate for him too. Okay, yeah. So my brother flew my dad out to DC, and we were going to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It had just opened that past September. You still had to have tickets to get in. So I had a ticket, and my daughter's sorority sister worked there. So she got a ticket for my dad and for her. So it's always cool to know folks. So we get over there to the museum, and it's 5 different floors, guys. And if you've not been there before, I strongly recommend that you go there. It's amazing. It's just amazing. And I'm walking through and I see the SNCC exhibit. I'm like, oh, let me go to the SNCC exhibit. I know Mr. Petty was in SNCC. And I come across this picture. And it says, unidentified man 1, unidentified man 2, Angela Davis and Stokely Carmichael. And I'm like, that looks like Mr. Petty. So I take a picture of it and I come back and I show it to his wife, Edna. And she just starts, that's Reg, you know. It's like, I thought that was him. And so now I'm sitting up here, how do I get this corrected? Because that's not cool at all. You know, and I was talking to Dr. Will Shannon. He's the executive director of the St. Clair County Historical Society, and I'm on the board with him. And I was like, Will, man, what should I do? I gotta get this corrected. So being the master librarian that he is, he pulled down the Library of Congress data on the picture and said, yeah, here's a start. So I go out there, I contact the Smithsonian, and I said, look, the man on the far left is Reginald Petty. I don't know who the man next to him is, but can you research this and correct it? A week later, they responded to me. They said, not only did we verify that's Reginald Petty, but the man next to him, name was James Garrett. And they corrected that record in the Smithsonian. So what he asked, he said, now, I said, can I use this picture in my book? He said, well, you gotta go to Milton Williams, who has the copyright on the picture. So I sent an email, they sent me his email, I emailed him, and he said, absolutely. The only thing I request from you is a paperback and a hard copy of the book. I'm like, I can do that. So I send that to the Smithsonian, and they come back and they say, great, thank you for getting me the paperwork from Mr. Williams, but we have a request from you too. We want a paperback and a hard copy of your book as well. One to go in the archives of the Smithsonian and one to go in our library. And just a few weeks ago, I got confirmation from Mr. Williams and from the Smithsonian that they got the books. And they changed the record. And it's just surreal to me that I was able to change something in the Smithsonian. But more than anything else, to right a wrong, this is not unidentified man one. This is Reginald Petty. And James Garrett, who is also a civil rights legend, should not have been set in that place as unidentified man number 2. And so because of that, these 2 individuals now have their names rightfully next to their photos, and Mr. Petty's son lives in DC. And now you take his kids to the museum and to see Mr. Petty's name, and I'm sorry, that always makes me emotional, so forgive me. So I was so glad we were able to do that for him because he absolutely deserved it. The next section that I wanted to read from is from a young man named Michael Lythcott. And Michael was so influenced by Mr. Petty that when I heard his story, and I mean, I'm interviewing him over the phone, he's crying, I'm crying. I was like, how did this man affect your life like this? And I'll just read a little bit of this, but it's so indicative of who he is, and you just need to know what effect he's had on his lives. Oberlin College in Oberlin, Illinois is described as a private liberal arts college and conservatory of music. It's the oldest coeducational liberal arts college in the United States and the second oldest continually operating coeducational institute of higher education in the world. While studying at Oberlin College, one of Michael's professors was the distinguished Eugene Redmond, a professor of English literature who hails from East St. Louis, Illinois, and he is the poet laureate of East St. Louis. Michael had made a pact with several of his fellow student graduates to work in a Black community for 4 to 5 years after graduation to give their talents and skills in service where they were needed. It is not inconceivable that Professor Redmond influenced the group in their decision, as he is a man of great Black pride and an associate member of the Black arts movement, still underway in Harlem, with a kindred friendship to BAM founder Amiri Baraka, formerly known as Leroy Jones. Upon arriving in Harlem, New York, Michael would meet Barbara Ann Tier, 11 years his senior, also from East St. Louis, and they would fall in love. Michael shared his experience meeting Miles Davis shortly after he began dating Barbara Ann. And for anyone in this room that does not know, Miles Davis, East St. Louis. I was shocked to receive a call from the famous trumpeter Miles Davis asking me to have drinks with him. When I arrived, I remembered him looking me up and down and finally saying, I just wanted to know who this nigga is that Barbara picked over me. If anybody knew Miles Davis, he had a mouth on him. and I mean, that's just who he is. So, being fresh out of college, Michael was unemployed. Barbara Ann called her friend Reginald Petty and asked him to give Michael a job. Reg reviewed Michael's background, which was quite interesting. His father, George I. Lythcott, worked for the National Institute of Health in Ghana with Prime Minister and President Kwame Nkrumah. The family moved from Shawnee, Oklahoma to Ghana in 1962. Michael would attend boarding schools in Ghana and Kenya. He originally wanted to join the seminary in Oklahoma and become a priest. And it's a Regism, spirituality, draw spirituality. Michael was fluent in several languages. Reg interviewed him and immediately hired him. He gave Michael 1 week's salary before he started to work so he could buy clothing, etc. Michael recalled that Reg put together a new and eclectic training staff comprised of grassroots Black folks without college degrees, but who knew how to navigate the communities. Michael's first assignment was a 6 to 8 week training schedule in the U.S. Virgin Islands before releasing the trainees into their community jobs. There was an issue though. The vendors at Charlotte O'Malley, Virgin Islands, said they had not been paid. Within 2 weeks of working, Reg wanted him to go to the Virgin Islands and address what was happening. Michael was in shock. He felt that he was being naive and wondered if Reg was setting him up for failure. He begrudgingly complied with the request. Michael figured out what was wrong and how the puzzle should be fixed. Reg wired the funds to Charlotte O'Malley and Michael dispersed them. It was a great win for Michael and really molded and changed his life. He came to realize that Reg had a good feeling about people and knew what Michael was capable of doing. He stated that Reg was increasingly supportive of him and overall encouraging. Michael stated he never had a boss as smart or nurturing as Reg through the tenure of his working life. Reg never wanted the credit or the glory, Michael said. He never grabbed the microphone, but always wanted to see his protege shine. If lost in the ocean, Reg would be the life vest. You would always be able to float. Michael also learned a great deal at the feet of Reg Petty, including how to begin the conversation when speaking to an outsider coming into a community to work. Go to the people, listen to them, understand what they know and understand. Build your plan on what they already know and understand. Then they will turn to each other and say, look what we have done for ourselves. Per Michael, this allowed the people to own the work. Reg created a sense of independence and pride in the people he worked with. He gave the example from Reg of a time when building a new office in one of the African countries. The builders wanted to build a sidewalk. Reg told them not to build the sidewalk. Don't create the path. Open the building and let the building operate for a month. Then look at the grass and see where they stepped. Then you can build the sidewalk. That was probably one of the times that we both bawled. Many times as Americans, we tend to try to tell everybody, this is how you should do it. This is the way you should do it. This is how, because this is how people should be, because this is how we are. And Reg planted that seed in Michael and said, no, we don't tell the people of a country what they should do. Let them tell us. And we listen and we learn. And it takes a really spiritually strong man to understand that and to impart that on other people. The last thing that he told me, he said that these are 4 things about Reg, his tenets. He has a good eye for talent. He is adept at selecting the right person for the right job. He communicates a crystal clear vision. He gives you the resources you need to bring actions to fruition. Michael said that Reg is not standing by you. He is sitting in the stands and smiling. And he refers to him as a selfless magician. This book goes on and on and on from many, many interviews, from many different people, from many different walks of life, particularly Peace Corps volunteers, whose lives have actually been changed just by encountering this man. This man who also was appointed by Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter to lead the Agency on Vocational Education in the United States. So anybody here that's ever dealt with or been involved with vocational education, this is one of the leaders of that whole process. And we could not be more thankful for him doing that. When Michael and I were talking, I had to start thinking about, why did Mr. Petty let me write this book? Like, who am I? You know? And so I always say that, no, I'm not Alex Haley, I'm not Zora Neale Hurston. I mean, how did I get this? And the answer had to be, I'm Jaye P. Willis. I have to be who I am. I always wanted to be a writer my entire life, but I allowed other things to get in my way. I worked and I had a great job with the government. I worked for 32 and a half years before I retired, and I absolutely have no regrets and I don't look back. But about 2007, I was at a crossroads. I was out of balance. As much as I worked and as hard as I worked and as much money as I made, I wasn't happy. I was out of balance. And I joined the Eugene B. Redmond Writers Club. And I started writing poetry again. And I started writing stories. And an entire world opened up for me. And one day, this gentleman was there talking to the group in a meeting. And Professor Redmond said, somebody should write his story. And I said that was going to be me. And over the course of those 7 years, it wasn't easy. I was still working. The pressures on, more money you make, the more pressures you have on your job. Lord have mercy. And it was rough. And there were times when I doubted that I would be able to tell this story adequately. Again, I was back to who am I? Who am I? And the answer kept coming back. You're Jaye P. Willis. And I have to thank my husband of 32 years because he never let me stop. He said, keep going. And when I would have my doubts and I would tell Mr. Petty, he said, keep going. When you get the book done is when it's supposed to be done. And that was the only thing he would tell. I said, I'm sorry it's taking so long. When you get the book done, it's when it's supposed to be done. He probably said that to me 100 times because I was sitting up there like, I can't get this, I can't do it. But this book is designed to be inspirational, particularly to young people who feel like I'm in a community and there are no options for me. And this gentleman grew up in that same community and took the options, and they can do the same thing. One of the things that actually made Mr. Petty so successful is the fact that he speaks fluent French. That is another thing that is an issue that we have in America, particularly with our young folks. And some of us, we take different classes. I took French for 3 years in high school, but I could not go to Paris right now and hold a conversation with anybody. I'm not fluent. There are people who have taken Spanish and German and Latin and all these classes we took in high school, but we don't go the next step to become fluent. And this is an issue that we're facing as Americans because you can go to the poorest of countries in the world and they speak 3 or 4 languages because they have to, because they're communicating with the rest of the world. And how arrogant of us, we only speak English. And then we expect everybody else to do the same thing. I went to Costa Rica with my daughter and her best friend and her mother, and Lord have mercy, we let them pick the place we were going. I'm thinking we're going to a resort in Costa Rica, and I'm all excited. They put us in a boutique hotel in San Jose, in the capital of Costa Rica, where everybody speaks Spanish, and none of us speak Spanish. It was an interesting adventure. And I'm sitting up here like, the only way that we got through was I saw this restaurant and had pollo. I had to pull out my Sesame Street Spanish. Said, that means chicken. I get it, that's a restaurant. We go in there, I can count to 20. I'm doing all of this. But another thing that happened while we were there, we're talking to the cab driver. And if you've not been to Costa Rica, once you get out into the city of San Jose, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Walmart, Target, IBM, Microsoft, Outback. It's like being back in America. I was like, oh my God, what happened? Because we were stuck in this little bitty area. And we're talking to the cab driver, and I said, so what's your favorite restaurant? And he said, oh my God, it's Taco Bell. I'm like, why would it be Taco Bell? And you live in Costa Rica, and my daughter's hitting me like, stop. And I'm like, what? She said, you are not in Mexico, you're in Costa Rica. It's not the same. I was like, oh snap. You know, I said, you are right. And this is something that Mr. Petty pulls out in this book. A lot of times we will take what's in our minds and think and turn everything around and say, this is how this is. No, Puerto Rican people will really have words with you if you go to their house and ask for tacos. They don't eat tacos. They just want, and I think they do it on purpose. You know, it's like, we're not gonna do it. Spaniards do not eat tacos. It is really a cultural thing, and that's okay. It's fine, but it was just unbelievable to me, the mindsets that we have. And when I look at the things that Michael said about Mr. Petty and what other people have said, change the way that you think. Become a citizen of the world. Learn another language. It's not too late. Babbel is out there. In case you were wondering, get out there and learn another language. It's not too late. And Mr. Petty, what was that you just said about Donald McHenry, another East St. Louisan who was ambassador to the United Nations? Here you go.
McHenry has been calling me about the last couple of months because State Department people and some foundations have been asking him to try to find African Americans who speak different languages. Mm-hmm. For example, one of them that I did give him is 28 years old. He learned Mandarin Chinese and Arabic. The salary that he's making right now, starting yesterday, $540,000 for 3 months. That's what they go pay. Because a lot of these countries would like to have African Americans as a part of the team, but they got to speak the language. And it's the money is there. McHenry, as you mentioned, is also on the board of directors of Carnegie and Rockefeller Foundation. They're always looking for people. Can you speak French? Can you speak even African languages? Can you speak something? We can, go in there and work with you. And you can't find anybody. We couldn't find anybody, maybe 2 or 3 people, and that's it. But in terms of the groups, and it's not included in the school curriculum, unfortunately.
So again, I just hope that I was able to whet your appetite about the book. There's more and more examples and interviews, again, that kind of show how we can kind of change our minds and our cultures and our mindsets and just try to understand that, again, we are citizens of the world. And if nothing else showed us that, COVID-19 did. That affected the entire world, a pandemic. And it was just so funny to me that this title was before SARS, it was before COVID-19. But again, it's not a pandemic of the body, it is a pandemic of the mind. And we can fix that. And so the hope, again, is that what this book will do is, after you read it, change the way that you're thinking. Open your mind. How's that? Don't change. Open your mind to new experiences and to travel. Get out of just country. Go and see what's happening someplace else in the world. And where can you help? Because this man helped people. And we can do the same things. But sometimes we feel like, well, who am I and what can I do? We're all spiritual people. We're all children of God, depending on what your religion is. You're children of a creator. And for anyone to have issues with another one of God's creations makes absolutely no sense. How dare you? So as we are all sitting here together, we're hoping that this book impacts young people, that helps them to understand that they can do whatever it is that they really want to do, but they have to apply themselves, and you have to be ready. When we had our first book reading, there was a young lady about 12, and she was asking questions. How do I become an activist? I want to speak more languages. How did you write this book? And I'm sitting there, and it was like, I was ready. When that call came, when that action came, somebody needs to write his story. I was ready. And we have to find ourselves ready because opportunities are gonna come and sometimes we're gonna miss them. And if it's supposed to be for you, guess what? It's gonna come back around again. But you gotta listen and you gotta keep your minds open. And so I thank you guys for coming out, and I want to ask, do you have any questions at all for Mr. Petty particularly, because he is the man of the hour? But are there any questions that anyone has about the book? Absolutely. You want what?
No, I'm loud. You know me. So, Mr. Petty, did you actually work on guinea worm issues when you were in Africa? Just because with the title and everything, and I know President Carter has worked with it a lot.
Well, yes, I guess
Oh,
yes, while I was Peace Corps director in Swaziland, which is in South Africa, my wife at the time was Caucasian. Those my kids are because and I say this because if you can imagine me with a white lady walking down the street in Johannesburg, South Africa at that time, it was not the most popular place to be for us. But she could tell you what my kids said about that experience. But anyway, I met Mandela and his family, and had to bribe a guard to go in to see Mandela. He was still in jail. So I did meet with him on about 2 different occasions. And I was really amazed how not angry he was at the world. How he thought that he was kind of Martin Luther King at that time. He really thought that changes would come. In fact, he and his wife, when he got out, divorced, as you know, because she wanted to see more hostile activities than he was willing to move on. And so those kind of experiences. So I went on a couple of marches in South Africa. Also, all of the Peace Corps volunteers' mail was open because they had to come through South Africa to get the Swaziland.
Oh.
They opened all, and any reference to South Africa negative was cut out. We also had a problem with the senator from North Carolina, who was very upset because of somebody named Jack Haley. He was the founder of Amnesty International. At the time, he was a Peace Corps volunteer, Peace Corps director in one of the countries, Botswana. And he, we would get together periodically and figure out what to do with how we could handle volunteers who wanted to go and party in South Africa and come back to their country. I said, this ain't cool. You're working here with the people and you can go to South Africa, but they can't. And you're gonna come back, and so we had to do some workshops. But because of this, the Senator Helms was very upset because the word got back to him that we were trying to tell volunteers how to, But anyway, just that kind of experience. Also, I guess the last one I'll tell you was when in Chicago, I made a trip to meet with Castro, thinking that this is something that we're going to run in and run out. But at the time, some of us were trying to get Castro to be a part of the African situation, not communism. And I found out recently that the whole meeting I had with Castro was taped by the CIA. And, but luckily, I wasn't talking about communism. I was talking about Africa. So really wasn't anything they could do. But when I first tried to join Peace Corps, I got a letter that says security clearance rejected. So we had to kind of get that changed with the Kennedys and stuff. But anyway, that's there's been a few things like that over the years. Kind of in the book, because we talk about them. And, but one of the things I did want to say that to Jay, let Jay know that how I feel about this. I don't think I did anything. To me, I really believe that I'm a statistician, but when I look at my life, almost everything that she's talked about, I was trying to do something else. But I was being pushed back to do this. Let me give you two examples that she's heard me mention. I received a scholarship to go to the University of Chicago School of Social Work. I was in Rockford, Illinois at the time, and had to go to a meeting at the school in Chicago. And I pretty much decided that I was going to stay in Rockford. I got a job, and, So I going to Chicago, hit a patch of ice, was thrown out of the opposite door of the car, and did it without a scratch. The door on the trunk was found under the dashboard. I was in a hospital. I was laying on the side of the road, and these guys came up to me, and I'm, you're half out of it, And I remember the guy asking me was I a Democrat or Republican. And I keep saying, if I give this guy the wrong answer, she's going to leave me here. But again, that was this. So I said, okay, I guess I'm going to Chicago. And also, when I come to the East End, I had no intentions of coming back out here. I was thinking about going back to Africa. I was in a coma for 3 months in DC with a brain aneurysm. The doctor said, you got 3 to 6 months to live. That's been about 32 years ago.
Wow.
So I came back to East St. Louis thinking I got a few months to live. Go back home, my family, that was the reason I came back here. But when I came back here, I met my wife, who's famous, an artist, and book. So I guess I was supposed to come back to East St. Louis in the way that I was supposed to go to Chicago. So I'm saying this because over and over again, everything I want to go left, the creator, whatever religion you are, keeps pushing me in another direction. So I just say, well, did I do this described in the book, or was it done?
Exactly. And Janice, if I understand you correctly, you were asking about guinea worms?
Well, I just wondered,
Yeah,
I know that the Carter Center has done a lot of work to eradicate guinea worms, and that it's not something anybody in the US seems to know much about, but on the continent of Africa, it's been a real soul stealer, steals eyesight and everything.
Oh, yeah, and you said that when you were in Upper Volta, when you were digging wells in Upper Volta. Yeah.
We did. We had some volunteers when I was in Upper Volta, French speaking. That was a major problem because the water that they were drinking had guinea worms in it. And another thing about the guinea worm, when you're drinking it, it can come out through your skin. Are you aware of that? Mm-hmm. You see these things coming out in the skin. And so we were encouraging people that we raised some money to buy the filters, water filters. And so we had about 12 volunteers who were working with the health areas. And the guinea worm was the really serious problem.
And so back to the United States. How in the world would I know anything about a guinea worm? Well, when I was growing up, we didn't have cable, didn't have internet, didn't have cell phones, didn't have laptops. But what we did have was Encyclopedia Britannica.
All right.
We had dictionaries. And that's how I knew what a guinea worm was. And I thought, when I talked to Mr. Petty about his time in Upper Volta, he mentioned guinea worms, I was like, oh, I know what that is. See, every time I talk to this man, it's a test. One of the things that he does not do is he does not suffer fools. If you do not know what you're talking about, he walk right past you. And every time we talked, I was being tested. And I didn't even know it, until I talked to Michael Lifeguard. He said, yeah, so what kind of questions does he ask you? I said, he asks them on the slide. And I'm able to answer them. And I was like, yeah, he said it all the time. You were being interviewed while you were interviewing him. It's like, oh, doggone. But yeah, no, this is something that I worry about our young folks too. Like, you gotta read, you gotta learn, you gotta read, And that was the only reason that I knew what a guinea worm was. And when I started thinking about it and what he was saying, I said, ooh, we have guinea worms in our minds. And the legislation that we're living under right now shows us how true that is. But we can combat these guinea worms. As you were just saying, Janice, there's a lot of information out there. We got to vote, which we just did. You got to continue to vote. You got to put the right people in the legislation. And then even when they get there, if they start acting contrary to what you think, you got to stay on top of them. And you got to be active and you got to be proactive. And so this is, again, are the things that we want the kids to understand, and not just the kids, but we're all adults, and we can still learn. And so I think that's an opportunity for us to do that. Were there any other questions from anyone?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
The stories that Mr. Petty has, the story that you put in the book, like he just went to a couple of details of some of the behind the scenes of all the things that he's done. Does the book go into those stories to that level? Or is it interviews of people who just have been impacted by it?
Now, there's interviews with him as well as people that have been impacted. So yes, there are some deeper issues that are in the book that he talks about. One of the ones that I thought was most interesting was one day during the height of apartheid, while Mr. Petty's walking down the street, it was at Johannesburg, a gentleman is walking towards him. His name is John Hicks. He's also from East St. Louis. He's the first Black to work at the Post-Dispatch, as a writer. And these two guys are walking down the street in Johannesburg and they run into each other in the height of apartheid. So it was like, man, we should go get a cup of coffee. Oh, but we can't because we're in South Africa. But I mean, it's just, I say that to say this, and particularly to the young folks, East St. Louis people are all over the world. Hey, you can't walk, and I mean, that's just the same for St. Louis people too, but for us, because it's such a small town, the per capita of greatness that came out of East St. Louis is staggering. It's just staggering. He talks about the fact that Miles Davis was not the only person to go to Juilliard from East St. Louis. And a lot of people they don't remember that. And we have statues of East St. Louis people in other countries that we don't even have here in America. And those are the kind of things that just kind of drive me crazy. And those things, again, are covered, in the book. Lincoln University has documentation of famous East St. Louisans. And all you have to do is go to the library and ask. But one of the things about this, and it just becomes, again, really clear, is when I read from the beginning, Mr. Petty sat at the feet of his parents and his grandparents and his elders and listened to their stories, and they talked about things that were happening. That 1917 riot was just commemorated in 2017. And Mr. Petty was on that group that helped to put together the commemoration of what we don't call a riot, but we call a pogrom, which is a German word which means slaughter. Because you can't have a riot if you're not both equally equipped with guns and weapons to kill each other. They were slaughtered. And he heard those stories as a child. So when 2017 came, it was like, oh, I think I could be on this commission and lend some positiveness to it. So again, we end with learn, and then learn some more. And I know I was a geeky kid that read encyclopedias, but it actually worked for me because we're sitting here right now with this book. Any other questions before we start signing books? Oh, sure.
I think I passed the sort of ground to some of you all when talking about people from East St. Louis. And I bet many of you didn't know that the first Black Secret Service agent in the White House was from East St. Louis, Illinois. Because he was with Kennedy when he was killed and saw too much, he ended up in jail. They framed him in 3 years. And we're now trying to get his record expunged. He was just pardoned about 6 months ago.
Oh my gosh.
So he's been pardoned, but now we're trying to get the whole thing expunged. And he's not in good health. He's 87 years old, living outside Chicago. And so we're trying to find out if he did a book. We're trying to find out whether that book still is available. We're going to look that up. But anyway, when we talk about, I remember also going to Norway and stopped in the capital of Norway and found out that there were two people from East St. Louis, one jazz musician and one fellow who was head of the classical, who were from East St. Louis.
Right. And I didn't say his name, no, I apologize for that. Eugene Haynes, concert pianist from East St. Louis who went to Juilliard with Miles Davis, but could not play in the United States. So he went to Europe. And while he was in Europe, they erected statues to this man. And there are, I bet if you went through the schools of East St. Louis and asked who's Eugene Haynes, they couldn't tell you who he is.
One of the things too, for you too, one of the things I'm trying to do now is I've identified about 15 millionaires from East St. Louis and one billionaire, a billionaire. A lady, and she will be coming back for Christmas around Thanksgiving, she said. Anyway, what I'm trying to do, I got all of them to say that they're willing to go on Zoom if they can't get back here. So I'm talking to some of the people in the district, not getting good comments so forth. But I don't know whether you all could do something. For example, Harry Edwards, people know who he is.
I bet the Missouri History Museum could set something up.
Well, I'm trying to find out just kind of how that, because Harry Edwards, you remember the Olympics, the fish in the air?
1968, Mexico City.
That's Harry Edwards. He's from East St. Louis, who organized the whole thing. He's a professor, doctor, San Diego. People like him, Nick Henry, there's a number of other people.
Jane's got a lot of books to write.
And so they should, but we're trying to connect them up with the young people around the world, but also the ones in East St. Louis. So just, because all of them have said they're willing to go. They travel a lot, but they're willing to go on Zoom or something.
Right.
So.
And you know what's funny? I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, y'all should call Tyler Perry and have Tyler Perry do this movie. And I was like, why would I call Tyler Perry and Reginald Hudlin is from East St. Louis?
Right.
And Warrington Hudlin, and we have our own Michael Francis sitting back here. We have people that can do this. I don't have to go to Georgia to get Tyler Perry to do anything. That's only because people don't know and understand who the people are in the city that we grew up in. And weirdly enough, I went to Assumption High School, the Catholic high school in East St. Louis. I took French for 3 years, and you know who was sitting in the class with me? Reginald Hudlin and Veda Manager. And anybody that doesn't know, Veda Manager was an executive with Nike for years. He has his own consulting company now. These guys are millionaires. You know, I was in Phoenix not too long ago with my daughter, and you know, I'm taking pictures, and I said, chilling, you know, poolside with my daughter in Phoenix, blah, blah. And I get this instant message from Veda. Say, oh man, how long are you gonna be there? I want to take you and your daughter to dinner. And I was like, are you trolling my Facebook? Like, what's happening here? You know, but the cool thing about it is that we're still in touch. You know, and these people exist. So no, I don't need to call Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry, if you're watching, call me. But I got people at home that I can reach out to, and that's just the beauty of East St. Louis. And so you're absolutely right, Janice. There is a whole set of books that I want to work on. With my next project, Michael asked me about a kid-friendly version of this book because there's some stuff in here that's not PG. Absolutely, there is a kids version of this book. You know, and so it's going to be not just Mr. Petty, but so many other people. And I'm just excited to be able to do that. And I know our time, you know, is coming to a close. So, Em, did you want to say anything before we start the book signing?
I've been keeping an eye on our virtual audience. They're being shy tonight, but thank you all so much for your questions, and thank you both to our guests. Let's give them one more round of applause. Thank you so much.
And we're ready to sign your books?
Yes, so we're gonna have them just at the table here if we want to set up the line, maybe go this way.
And if you don't have a book, there are books for sale.
Yes, we have books for sale at the counter. If you don't have one, grab one. If you already have one, grab a second, and we will get a sign for you.
I'm gonna guard the base.
Did it start at 6?
Most important job.
Just a couple minutes after 6 it got started, yeah.
I thought it started on.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Here, let me end the broadcast.